10-minute deep dive into a book. Today we are reading the classic 100 Years of Solitude. This novel, written by Colombian author Gabriel García Márquez, is a masterpiece of Latin American magical realism. It's praised as an epic that reflects the historical and social landscape of Latin America. Let's delve into the 7-generation saga of the Buendía family and the rise and fall of the town of Macondo. The story begins in an indigenous village far from the coast. José Arcadio Buendía, a descendant of Spaniards, grew up in the same village as his cousin Ursula. When they expressed their desire to marry, their parents opposed it. Ursula's aunt had married Buendía's uncle, resulting in a son born with a pig's tail. This son spent his entire life wearing baggy pants, maintaining his purity for 42 years, and was eventually killed by a butcher friend who cut off his tail. The parents feared the disgrace of a rift between the two families, who had been close for centuries, and strongly opposed their marriage. Buendía said, "I don't care if we have piglets, as long as they can talk." But Ursula was frightened by her mother's ominous predictions. Due to the fear of giving birth to a child with a tail, like her aunt and uncle, Ursula wore a special corset every night and refused to sleep with her husband. This made them the subject of the villagers' ridicule. One day, Buendía won a cockfight against his neighbor Prudencio Aguilar. Aguilar was furious and publicly mocked their marital life. Buendía remained calm. 10 minutes later, he returned to the cockfighting arena with his grandfather's spear and dueled with the mocker under the villagers' watchful eyes. Aguilar was killed before he could retaliate. Although this was seen as an honorable duel, it left a deep psychological impact on the Buendía couple. From then on, the ghost of the deceased frequently appeared before Buendía, its sorrowful and mournful gaze haunting him day and night. Thus, the Buendía family, along with their friends and their families, left the village in search of a new home. After more than 2 years of wandering, they arrived at a flat riverside land. Buendía, following a vision from his dream, persuaded everyone to settle there and named the town Macondo. Thus began the history of the Buendía family in Macondo. Buendía was a natural leader. He arranged the houses, guided people in sowing crops, and educated the children. However, with the arrival of the gypsies, all sorts of fascinating novelties also came. Buendía was an inventive person. When he saw a magnet from the gypsies, he thought of using it to extract gold. Seeing a magnifying glass focus sunlight, he tried to develop a powerful weapon. Through the gypsies, he obtained a sextant and an astrolabe for navigation, and realized through experiments that the earth was round, like an orange. Buendía was dissatisfied with his backward lifestyle and complained to his wife. "Incredible things are happening in the world, just across the river. There are all sorts of amazing machines, yet we live here like fools." Since Macondo was hidden in vast swamps and isolated from the world, he was determined to open a path to connect Macondo with the great inventions of the outside world. He led a group of people to cut through the thickets for over 2 weeks, but ultimately failed. He said painfully, "We will never go anywhere else. We will rot here, alive, and never enjoy the benefits of science." Buendía wanted to change Macondo with the scientific technology brought by the gypsies. He studied hard, built a laboratory, and focused on alchemy, shutting himself in the lab all day. He wanted to change the existing world, but no one understood him. The more he tried, the more isolated he became. His wife thought he was neglecting his duties, and others thought he was delusional. The incomprehensible loneliness trapped him, causing him to lose his sanity. He was tied to a large tree by his family and died there decades later. Afterward, Ursula became the pillar of the family. The second generation of the Buendía family had 2 sons and a daughter. The eldest, José Arcadio, was born on the way to Macondo. He grew up on the road, stubborn like his father, but without his father's imagination. He had a child with a woman named Pilar Ternera, but when the gypsies came to Macondo for a performance, he fell in love with a gypsy girl and chose to leave. He traveled the seas for over a decade before returning to Macondo. Although he came back, his temperament was unpredictable. Ignoring his family's opposition, he married his parents' adopted daughter, Rebecca, was kicked out of the house, and was eventually shot by his wife, Rebecca. The second son, Aureliano, was born in Macondo. He cried in his mother's womb and was born with his eyes open. From a young age, he had the gift of foresight. As a boy, he was as quiet as his father, spending his days in his father's lab making little goldfish. As he grew older, he fell in love with Remedios, the young daughter of the magistrate of Macondo. Before this, he had a son named Aureliano José with his brother's lover. His wife, who was pregnant with twins, was poisoned by Amaranta and died. Later, he joined the Civil War and became a colonel. Throughout his life, he survived 14 assassination attempts, 73 ambushes, and 1 firing squad. He was even poisoned in his coffee, but survived. When he realized the war was meaningless, he signed a peace treaty with the government and then shot himself in the chest, but miraculously survived. He had affairs with 17 different women and fathered 17 sons. These sons later returned to Macondo to find their roots, but were hunted down. Only the eldest survived after a week. Aureliano returned home in his old age and dedicated his days to making little goldfish. He would make 2 each day, and when he reached 25, he would melt them down and start over. Like his father, he lived a life of isolated solitude until his death. The third child was a daughter named Amaranta, the most emotional member of the Buendía family. She fell in love with the Italian pianist Pietro, but despite their relationship, she refused to marry him. In despair, Pietro committed suicide by slitting his wrists. Amaranta, in remorse, plunged her hand into burning coals until the flesh was charred and bandaged it with black cloth for the rest of her life, vowing never to marry. Yet, she felt a deep loneliness and even engaged in an affair with her young nephew, seeking temporary solace. However, she could never escape her inner solitude. She locked herself in her room daily, sewing and unsewing shrouds until her final moments. The third generation of Buendías included José Arcadio's son Arcadio and Aureliano's son, Aureliano José. The former, unaware of his birth mother, almost made a grave mistake by falling in love with her. His mother, desperate, spent half of her life savings to arrange a meeting with a girl named Santa Sofia on the eve of the Macondo defense. Later, he became a tyrant in Macondo, indulging in corruption and eventually being executed by the conservative army. When he was executed, Santa Sofia's eldest daughter was 8 months pregnant with his twins. His cousin, Aureliano Yaumino José, was raised by his aunt Amaranta and fell in love with her. Fortunately, reason prevailed over emotion. As an adult, he left Macondo with his father, Colonel Aureliano Buendía, and worked as a sailor on a German freighter for many years. After deciding how he wanted to live the rest of his life, he returned to Macondo with the intention of marrying his aunt Amaranta, who firmly rejected him. To alleviate his loneliness, he indulged in numerous affairs and sought comfort from prostitutes. Eventually, he was shot dead by government soldiers at the theater entrance. The fourth generation of Buendías consisted of Arcadio's 3 children with Santa Sofia, 1 daughter and 2 sons. The eldest daughter, Remedios, was stunningly beautiful, exuding a scent that unnerved and even killed several men. This unique girl was pure and untainted by the world, and she miraculously ascended to the sky, clutching a white sheet, and disappeared forever. Her two brothers, José Arcadio II and Aureliano II, were twins. The elder brother, José Arcadio II, worked as a foreman for the American Banana Company and incited a workers' strike, becoming a labor leader. Later, he led over 3,000 workers in a strike, which was brutally suppressed by the military and police, leaving him as the sole survivor. He witnessed the government transporting the workers' corpses by train to the sea and dumping them into the ocean. He then tried to expose the massacre, but was deemed insane. In his profound fear and disappointment, he locked himself in his house and devoted himself to studying the gypsies' parchment manuscripts until his death. His younger brother, Aureliano II, had no proper occupation and spent his days indulging in pleasure, neglecting his wife Fernanda, and living with his mistress Petra. Strangely, whenever he lived with his mistress, his livestock would multiply rapidly, bringing him wealth. But when he returned to his wife, the family fortunes would decline. He had 2 daughters and a son with his wife, and ultimately, he and José Arcadio II died simultaneously in their illness. The 5th generation of the Buendía family included Aureliano II's 2 daughters and 1 son. The eldest son, José Arcadio, was sent to a seminary in Rome as a child, with his mother hoping he would become a bishop. But he had no interest in it. He deceived his mother about studying at the seminary, solely for the sake of an imagined inheritance. After his mother's death, he returned home and lived by selling off the family estate. Later, he discovered over 7,000 gold coins hidden in the cellar by Ursula, leading to an even more decadent lifestyle until he was killed by robbers. The eldest daughter, Renata Remedios, fell in love with Maurizio Babylonia, a mechanic at the Banana Company's garage. Her mother forbade their relationship, forcing them to meet secretly in the bathroom. When her mother found out, she confined Renata to the house and hired guards. Mauricio was shot in the back by a guard while climbing onto the roof and was bedridden for life, mistaken for a chicken thief, and died in loneliness. Renata, devastated, was sent to a convent by her mother to keep the family scandal hidden. She remained silent for the rest of her life. The youngest daughter, Amaranta Ursula, studied in Brussels in her early years, where she met and became involved with a pilot named Gaston. After their relationship began, they returned to Macondo, where they saw the town in ruins and resolved to rebuild it. She was energetic and full of vitality, and within 3 months, she revitalized the family estate. Her presence made Macondo a unique place, and her demeanor was better than anyone in the family. She aimed to discard all outdated customs and decided to settle down to save the troubled town. However, her husband Gaston eventually returned to Brussels. The 6th generation of the Buendía family included Renata's illegitimate son with the mechanic, Aureliano Buendía. He grew up in solitude, his only hobby being hiding in the gypsy Melchiades' room, studying various mysterious books and manuscripts. He could communicate with the spirit of the long-dead gypsy Melchiades, and was instructed to learn Sanskrit. He remained indifferent to the world around him, but was well-versed in medieval studies until he fell in love with his aunt, Amaranta Ursula, and engaged in an incestuous relationship with her. Amaranta Ursula gave birth to a boy, the only child in a century to be conceived out of love in the Buendía family. Tragically, the child was born with a pig's tail. Amaranta Ursula died from postpartum hemorrhage, and this pig-tailed boy was the 7th generation heir of the Buendía family. Aureliano was so grief-stricken that he neglected his son, who was devoured by ants shortly after birth. When Aureliano saw his son reduced to a small piece of skin by the ants, he finally deciphered Melquiades' manuscript. The manuscript's opening words read, "The first of the line is tied to a tree, and the last is being eaten by ants." The manuscript turned out to be the history of the Buendía family. As he finished reading the last chapter, a sudden hurricane swept the entire town of Macondo off the face of the earth, making the village disappear forever. Throughout the entire story, the Buendía family experienced a journey from simple rural life to revolutionary wars, followed by the erosion of Western ideologies after colonial invasions, and finally despair and contempt when everything settled down. This narrative reflects the historical evolution and social reality of Colombia, and even all of Latin America. At the same time, Márquez portrayed the spirit of solitude within the family. In this family, there was no emotional communication, trust, or understanding between husbands and wives, fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, or siblings. Many individuals attempted various arduous explorations to break the solitude, but due to the inability to find an effective way to unite scattered forces, all efforts ultimately ended in failure. This sense of solitude deeply pervaded the Buendía family and the town of Macondo. Finally, let's end today's reading with a quote from the book. "Wherever you may go, you should remember that the past is a lie, that memory is a treacherous corridor with no return, and that all springs, even the most effervescent and durable, are mere fleeting realities."